Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, a former Hollywood starlet, once glamorized, lionized and adored and beloved by all, but now the neglected, rejected relic of a bygone age, reduced to desuetude and dusty insignificance in my ancient Hollywood manner, much like the character Gloria Swanson plays in Billy Wilder's classic film noir, Sunset Boulevard. Here to talk to you today about Saturn in opposition to Venus. Now, oppositions are difficult, tense, conflicted, dualized aspects because they represent the halfway point in the cyclical journey of two planets. You know, we have the conjunction, the gradual square and trine, and the opposition, and then the gradual working back towards the conjunction. So the opposition is like the halfway point between a significant journey, development, project, or undertaking, and that frustrating moment where we may have some awareness of how far we have come in a particular endeavor, but also the sobering disappointment and disquietude of being conscious of how far we still have yet to go. So in order to have an effective and clarified understanding of how an opposition might present itself and the themes we might expect to see, it's usually useful to trace it back to the conjunction and to see what was occurring at that time. When two planets are in conjunction, they begin to lay the seeds and the foundations and the flagstones and the groundwork of some kind of new beginning or endeavor, which simultaneously might cut them off from the past or things that occurred before. This particular conjunction of Saturn and Venus took place back in between January 13th and 31st. So if you have a look at what was going on in your life at that time, you might have a better appreciation of what has flourished or grown as a consequence of the actions or commitments or decisions which were taken back at that point near the beginning of the year. So every planetary pairing of two different planets has a specific relationship or goal and center of conflict that they embody when they work together as part of a cycle. Venus represents our desire to be loved, to be appreciated, to be admired for who we uniquely are, for our own beauties, values, sense of style, aesthetics, or any kind of quality that sets us apart and honors our personality in a unique way. But she's also connected to our values about what we love in this world, what we cherish, what we feel matters, and what expresses the aesthetic tone of what makes the life a more comfortable, enjoyable, and pleasurable place for us. So when Venus is taking those qualities and working them with Saturn, Saturn rather represents duty, maturity, old age, and taking on a specific role or vocation within society. Saturn is a more impersonal planet in that he represents the fact that we live as part of a collective, we live as part of a complex network of humans, and that life isn't just all about pleasure, personal gratification, self-fulfillment, and self-indulgence, but rather it says we have an honor or a duty and an obligation to give something back to society, to, you know, perform a particular work, labor, or function that justifies our existence as part of that collective. So when Venus and Saturn work together, we feel, on the one hand, a pressure to take our personal values and to apply them in a way that has more of a responsible, mature, complex societal tone to it, to feel like we need to use our particular values and gifts to give back to the world and to justify our existence as part of a collective. Hence, this aspect can sometimes align with taking on a new job, a new responsibility, finding a new home, beginning a new friendship, work partnership or romantic partnership that is based on a sharing of duties and responsibilities and obligations to one another, but sometimes also more personal inward disciplines. You know, it might be setting yourself a goal. I want to lose this much weight, or I want to change my aesthetic to this particular look, or I want to start this exercise regime. Anything where we say that I'm going to take myself in hand and understand that in order to really manifest the things that I find beautiful, pleasant, enjoyable, fulfilling and worthwhile, it can sometimes take hard work, discipline and self-sacrifice, and the principles of deferred gratification to set yourself the long-term goal and say, this is what I'm streamlining my focus towards. These are the things that I want to manifest, and these are the practical things I'm going to start doing to bring these things into existence. So, for instance, back when these planets were conjunct in that period in January earlier in the year, that was a very transformative time for me of endings and beginnings. I had just finished my tenancy in a place I had been living beforehand and was now looking for a new place. I had to get rid of a lot of my old things to make space for the new life that I was starting. But it was also when I really started to put myself out there as an astrologer, offering my services to people, and also, you know, really deciding to commit more fully and regularly to this channel. So I was laying those seeds there, which felt very tentative and nervous and uncertain at the time. Likewise, I was also building up to starting my hormone therapy treatment, which began just after this aspect separated on the 1st of February. So it was a real time of clearing out the old and making space for new developments that I either wanted to make in my life or which necessity had demanded I make, because Saturn is always ruled by what is necessary. And so when Saturn and Venus work together, we're trying to find a compromise between what we want versus what we need to do to ensure our survival and safekeeping within the larger collective and framework and necessary hardships of life. So when I think about these two planets together, I almost imagine that you have this big Saturnian mountain, like the mountain of Purgatory in Dante's Infernal Comedy. And Aphrodite is there perched at the top, representing some kind of Venusian goal that we are willing to labour and work hard to achieve. And as Venus gradually moves further away from Saturn in the cycle, it's like we're gradually climbing that mountain and working harder and harder and encountering various obstacles, distractions, diversions and difficulties on the way that either slow our progress or whet our appetite to keep going, to reach the pinnacle that we are hoping to attain. And then once we come to the opposition aspect, where the planets are separated by 180 degrees, it can often be a time where there is a sense of fulfillment, where we may have begun to achieve and realize and manifest some of the objectives that we've set for ourselves. And yet there can also be a sense of disappointment as well. You know, the personal values and yearnings and desires of Venus can be very idealistic. We can dream or fantasize about how something wonderful will be, but once we actually get it, we may find that it's not as fulfilling or wonderful as we hoped it can be. It reminds me of the adage of Oscar Wilde that the only thing worse than not getting what you want is getting it. And by that aphorism, he was expressing the dissonance between how we dream and hope something will be versus the stark Saturnian reality of how it actually is. But there's a lot of complex psychology going on here, because when these two planets have started to separate, to become more dualized, they no longer feel in harmony like they did at the back of the conjunction where they were working together as teammates. Instead, it's almost like they've been trudging along, working together as comrades throughout this whole cycle. They've reached the opposition, and you know what? They're getting pretty fucking sick of each other. Venus is getting tired of Saturn always weighing her down with work and duties and responsibilities and her obligations to others. And she starts to feel, well, when am I going to get my due? You know, the whole reason I engaged on this journey to begin with was in the hopes that I would get something out of it. I would get rewarded. I would be appreciated. I would be loved. I would be told that I was beautiful. I would be cherished and admired by others for my unique individual Venusian qualities. And instead, I don't feel like I ever have time for that, because I'm always busy giving to other people and working for other people and laboring on behalf of other people. When am I going to get some of the worldly rewards that I was promised at the beginning of this undertaking? So Venus can feel like during the opposition, that maybe she has sacrificed too much to Saturn, too much to other people, too much to the duties and responsibilities of the real world, and might feel that she hasn't gotten back enough to begin with. So if we have allowed Saturn to keep Venus in its shadow throughout that cycle, this might be a time where we go, okay, I need a bit more balance between these two things. I need a bit more balance between work and pleasure, between my responsibilities to others versus my own need to feel warm, special, and beloved. I need to have both of these things. If I allow myself to be consumed by one or the other, this isn't going to work. And this is part of the balancing act of learning to work with oppositions, that because the planets are now in conflict, we can very easily fluctuate between extremes of being one or the other, embodying the Venus that says it's going to live this romantic, luscious life that is pleasurable and enjoyable and fun and all for itself, versus Saturn in Pisces, on the other hand, that thinks that all such worldly strivings are vanity, and that we are better off rejecting and renouncing all of them in sake of the greater nobility of sacrificing one's individuality to serve that great oceanic collective in a spiritual and compassionate manner. So whilst we might feel those backs and forth, ultimately we want to find some middle point to them to honour both of these different needs and obligations within us to nourish and feed both planets, rather than choosing one or rejecting the other. And yet issues of rejection and leaving things behind do often take place at an opposition. Like I said, it can be this moment of realization, of seeing how far we've come and honouring that, but also asking ourselves, okay, I've come this far in the journey, I have achieved these certain things, but are they truly things that I want? Are they truly things that are fulfilling my Venus and my heart and making me happy? Have I sacrificed too much to some abstract goal that actually has very little to do with who I am and is more just fulfilling the expectation that I feel society at large has thrust upon me? How can I come back to my own heart centre to some degree, whilst still honouring those larger, more preponderant needs? And we might ask ourselves at this midpoint in the journey, do I still want to go on in the direction that I'm heading? Is this still the right path for me? Would I be better off leaving things behind? Have certain things become too burdensome, too dull, too heavy, too boring, and are things that I would rather let go so that I can leave space for a commitment that does offer me more balance between work and pleasure, between myself and my duty to others? Is there another option? So I talk about balancing and oppositions, and there is a Libran quality to a lot of oppositions, in that it can often represent a time when we feel indecisive, stuck, stagnant, unsure of our next move, where things feel caught, like they're in stalemate, like there's no easy decision we can have that won't just lump us with exactly the same problem that we're endeavouring to leave it behind. So usually using those times to think things through, to evaluate our progress and where we want to go next is the best employment of the opposition energy. I usually find it's not until the opposition has separated that some kind of decision or conclusion does take place, where the scales start to swing in favour of one planet or another, and we may make a definitive choice about where we want to go next. So, like in my own case, when I look back to where I was at that conjunction and where I am now, my life has changed a great deal. Back then, everything was kind of in a state of uncertainty and upheaval, and I was desperately trying to seek that new Saturnian ground to even things out, to give my Venus a sense of safety and containment and respect and well-being in the world. And from having just started my career as an astrologer and YouTuber at that time, I can now see, okay, well, half a year on, well, more than half a year on, 10 months, 9 months on, I've made over 100 videos. I feel much more confident in my role as some kind of authority figure / hierophant / priestess in that domain. I have accumulated a lot more knowledge and been very disciplined in the new knowledge and deeper understanding that I have sought throughout that period. I'm also in a much more stable place domestically and financially, and a lot of the projects that I laid forth at that time have been brought to a greater state of fruition, and yet my Venus does feel neglected and fulfilled. I do feel like I've spent the last half a year working and labouring and giving to other people and not getting a lot back. And whether that's true or not, I'm merely expressing that so that you can have an idea of some of the subjective experiences that we feel when Saturn is opposing Venus. Sometimes we can feel like life hasn't honoured us, like we don't feel important, we don't feel cherished and respected by others, that we feel rejected, we feel humbled and unseen, and our hearts can cry out and kind of say, well, when am I going to get my day? When am I going to get my acknowledgement? When is this actually going to feel good for me on a personal level? And whilst I can also see how much progress I've made in my hormone therapy in that time, and in my appearance and in my general levels of comfort and physical well-being, I've also just upped my dose, so I'm on to the next part of the journey, as it were. But I also feel very unfulfilled in my personal romantic relationships, which have failed to flourish in that period. And during this opposition, I have felt that craving to give more to my Venus, to devote more time to seeking love and romance and pleasure and eroticism, and really trying to balance out and devote to the next part of the cycle what was perhaps undervalued or not properly developed during the first part of the cycle. So this is what I mean about it also being a time of calibration, a time of going, okay, this is what I've done with the first part of that cycle, what am I going to do with the next thing? What can I do better? What can I improve? Yes, I want to slap myself on the back and respect myself for what I have achieved, but what do I still have to do? What am I going to do with the next how many ever months until these planets conjunct again and start a new cycle? Anyway, that's mostly just talking about how we experience the opposition as a transit. I haven't really gone into how it's experienced as a natal placement or a progression. However, I am tired, I don't have as much energy at the moment, so I'm going to leave that there, otherwise I won't finish this video, and I'd like to put something out there because I've been a little slow lately. I hope you enjoyed this video, that you found it useful. If you have any of your own stories, of your own journeys and developments that you would like to share, please share them in the comments. I always love hearing from you. If you want to message me more personally, you can contact me via email at thestarsunraveled@outlook.com. You can follow me on Instagram at astrologyandunderwear, and you could very kindly and benevolently support me on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thestarsunraveled.